A marriage built on lies, a legacy on the line. She's a woman with nothing to lose. He's a billionaire with no time for love. But when desperation forces them into a contract, Ellie staring at Jack in shock, Jack slamming a file onto his desk, Graham smirking during a heated confrontation. Their fake relationship becomes real in ways they never expected, as secrets, betrayal and passion threaten to tear them apart. Ellie's voice trembling. Was any of this real? Jack stepping closer, his voice raw. It is now. The evening was a tapestry of fading sunlight and shimmering glass, with the Whitmore Tower standing as its centerpiece. A monument of modern architecture, its 50 floors of reflective glass and steel seemed to pierce the clouds above Miami. The golden hues of the setting sun danced across its surface, casting ripples of light onto the bustling city below. A fountain at its base, illuminated by soft LED lighting, sprayed arcs of water that glistened like jewels. It was a building that screamed wealth, power, and permanence. Jack Whitmore sat alone in his sprawling corner office on the top floor. The view of Miami was breathtaking, with the ocean stretching endlessly on one side and the city's heartbeat visible in its flickering lights on the other. But Jack barely noticed. His jaw was tight, his gaze fixed not on the horizon, but on the aged piece of paper spread out on his polished oak desk. The letter had arrived earlier that day, delivered by a solemn-faced attorney who had insisted on Jack reading it in private. It bore his grandfather's familiar scrawl, shaky but unmistakable. Jackson, my boy. The letter began. The warmth in the opening words was a cruel contrast to the bombshell that followed. Jack reread the lines that had haunted him for hours. To inherit the company, to protect the legacy I built with my own hands, you must marry for love. True love. A union of genuine hearts. Without this, the Whitmore fortune will be given to charity. His fist tightened around the paper, crumpling it slightly before he flattened it out again. The anniversary of Whitmore Enterprises, the date by which he was required to fulfill this demand, was in 1 week. 1 week to find a woman he could call his wife. 1 week to convince his grandfather and himself that it was real. Jack let out a dry laugh, more bitter than amused. Love? What did Arthur Whitmore know about love in today's world? Marriage was a business deal like any other. You weighed the risks and rewards, signed the contract, and hoped it didn't come back to bite you. Jack had no time for sentimental fantasies, yet here he was, staring at a clause in his future that he couldn't simply buy his way out of. There was a knock at the door. Jack's assistant, Charlotte, stepped in, heels clicking softly against the floor. Charlotte was the epitome of efficiency, her blonde hair tied back into a severe bun, her tailored suit free of even a wrinkle. She held a folder in one hand and a tablet in the other. "You've been in here all day," she said, a note of concern in her otherwise professional tone. "Should I reschedule the investors' meeting for tomorrow?" Jack shook his head, his fingers tapping impatiently on the desk. "No, keep it. I'll be fine." Charlotte lingered, her sharp blue eyes scanning his face. "Jack, you look like someone dropped a bomb on you. What's going on?" He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his dark hair. "It's my grandfather. He's decided to turn my life into a soap opera." Charlotte raised an eyebrow. "Arthur? What did he do now?" Jack slid the letter across the desk. She read it quickly, her lips pressing into a thin line as she absorbed the contents. "Well," she said, setting the letter down, "that's unconventional, but not impossible. You've got connections. Women practically throw themselves at you. It's just a matter of—" "Don't!" Jack cut her off sharply, his tone colder than he intended. "I don't need advice on how to handle this." Charlotte tilted her head, studying him. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, something unspoken. She hesitated, then spoke carefully. "If you need my help, I'm here. Whatever you decide." Jack nodded, dismissing her with a glance. As the door closed behind her, he exhaled deeply. Help? He didn't need help. What he needed was a plan. That evening, Jack attended a gala hosted by Whitmore Enterprises. The event was a display of opulence, held in the grand ballroom of the city's most luxurious hotel. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting a warm glow on the crowd of Miami's elite. Jack moved through the sea of faces with practiced ease, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries, but his mind was elsewhere. Across the room, a young woman stood at the podium. She was visibly nervous, her fingers gripping the edges of her note cards, but her voice, when she spoke, carried a quiet strength. "This community center is more than just a building," she said. "It's a haven for families, a place where children find safety and hope. It's a cornerstone of our neighborhood, and losing it would mean losing a part of who we are." Jack's gaze locked onto her. She wasn't like the other guests, with their designer gowns and air of self-importance. Her simple black dress was elegant but understated, her brown hair pulled into a loose bun. Her name was Ellie Harper, and she had Jack's attention in a way that few things ever did. When her speech ended, polite applause rippled through the room, but it was clear that most of the audience wasn't listening. Ellie stepped off the podium, her cheeks flushed, and retreated to a quiet corner near the terrace. Jack followed, curiosity sparking in his chest. "You spoke well," he said, his voice cutting through the evening air as he approached. Ellie turned, startled. Her blue eyes met his, wary but intrigued. "Thank you," she said. "Not that it seems to matter much." "People here are more interested in what's in their champagne glasses than what's happening in their city," Jack replied dryly. "But that doesn't mean they're all deaf. Tell me more about this center of yours." Ellie hesitated, her instincts telling her not to trust this stranger, but something about his tone felt genuine. She explained the situation, how the historic community center was set to be demolished to make way for luxury condos, how she'd spent months fundraising and lobbying to no avail. Jack listened, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he leaned closer, his voice low. "What if I told you I could save your center?" Her brows furrowed. "I'd say you're either lying or you want something in return." A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Smart. You'd be right on both counts." Ellie crossed her arms. "And what exactly do you want?" Jack met her gaze, the weight of the moment settling between them. "I need a wife, temporarily. No strings attached, just a marriage on paper. You help me, I help you." Ellie blinked, stunned. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, struggling to process what he'd just said. "You can't be serious." "I'm very serious," Jack said, his tone unwavering. "Think about it. You get what you need, and in a week, this is over. You walk away with your center intact. No one gets hurt." Ellie stared at him, her heart pounding. The idea was insane, but his confidence was unnerving. Could she trust him? Could she afford not to? "I'll think about it," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack nodded, his expression unreadable. "Do that. But don't take too long. Time isn't on our side." As he walked away, Ellie leaned against the railing, the city lights blurring as her thoughts swirled. She had no idea what she was getting into, but something told her life, as she knew it was about to change forever. Ellie Harper stood on the cracked pavement outside the small brick building that had been her second home for years. The sign above the double doors read, "Riverside Community Center." In faded blue paint and the warm yellow light spilling from the windows onto the darkened street gave the impression of life and hope. Inside, she could hear the muffled sounds of laughter, the clatter of chairs, and the occasional squeal of children playing tag. But tonight, the sounds brought her no comfort. In less than a week, this place could be gone forever. Ellie pressed her fingers to her temples, trying to push back the migraine that had been building since the gala. She couldn't stop replaying her conversation with Jack Whitmore. His voice, so calm and assured, had planted a dangerous seed of temptation in her mind. She couldn't afford to trust him, or anyone who offered a solution that seemed too good to be true. And yet, his proposition was impossible to ignore. The door creaked open behind her, and a familiar voice broke through her thoughts. "Ellie, everything okay?" She turned to see her best friend, Grace Miller, stepping outside. Grace's auburn hair framed her round face, and her green eyes were full of concern. She held a stack of flyers in one hand, her other resting on the doorframe. Ellie forced a smile. "Yeah, just thinking." Grace raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. "Thinking about what? And don't say nothing, because I know that look. You're plotting something." Ellie hesitated, weighing how much to share. Grace was her closest confidant, but even she might think Ellie had lost her mind if she knew the truth. Still, if anyone could help her make sense of this insanity, it was Grace. "I met someone at the gala," Ellie began, her voice faltering. "He said he can help save the center." Grace's expression brightened. "That's great! Who is he? A philanthropist? A donor?" Ellie shook her head. "Not exactly. He's Jack Whitmore." The name hung in the air like a bomb waiting to detonate. Grace's eyes widened, and she let out a low whistle. "Jack Whitmore? As in the Jack Whitmore, billionaire, business tycoon, and Miami's most eligible bachelor?" Ellie nodded, biting her lip. "Yeah, that one." Grace's excitement dimmed slightly, replaced by caution. "And he offered to help you. What's the catch?" Ellie hesitated, the weight of Jack's proposition pressing down on her. "He wants me to marry him. Just for a week. It's complicated." Grace's jaw dropped. "He what?" "Ellie, that's not a catch. That's a trap. Why would he even ask you that?" Ellie explained everything. Jack's ultimatum, his grandfather's will, and his promise to buy the community center if she agreed. By the time she finished, Grace looked as though she didn't know whether to laugh or scream. "That's insane," Grace said finally. "You can't seriously be considering this." "I don't know what else to do," Ellie admitted, her voice breaking. "We've tried everything, Grace. Fundraisers, petitions, meetings with city officials. None of it's worked. If this place goes, so does everything we've fought for. The after-school programs, the food pantry, the safe spaces for these kids, it's all gone." Grace's expression softened, and she reached out to squeeze Ellie's hand. "I get it. I really do. But marrying a stranger, even temporarily, that's a huge risk." Ellie looked away, her chest tightening. "I know, but it's not like I have any other options." Before Grace could respond, the sound of children's laughter drew their attention to the street. Two boys darted past, chasing each other with sticks, their faces alight with joy. Ellie watched them, her resolve hardening. "I have to think about them," she said quietly. "Not about what's easy or what's safe. If marrying Jack means saving this place, then maybe it's worth it." Grace sighed, rubbing her forehead. "Just promise me you'll be careful. If this guy has an agenda, you need to figure it out before you say yes." Ellie nodded, though doubt still lingered in her heart. "I will." Jack leaned back in his leather chair, the glow from his office's floor-to-ceiling windows casting shadows across his face. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, his thoughts circling like vultures. Charlotte stood across the desk, her arms crossed. She had been quiet for most of the evening, but now her sharp eyes bored into him like twin lasers. "So," she said finally, "you're really going through with this?" Jack set his glass down with a soft clink. "I don't have a choice." Charlotte arched an eyebrow. "Oh, come on, Jack, you always have a choice. You're just choosing the nuclear option." He shot her a withering look. "Do you have a better idea?" Charlotte hesitated, then sighed. "Number." "But that doesn't mean I like this plan. You're asking a complete stranger to play house with you. What happens when she decides she wants more than you're willing to give?" "She won't," Jack said firmly. "This is business, nothing more." Charlotte shook her head, her frustration evident. "You can't control everything, Jack. Not people, and definitely not emotions. If this blows up in your face, don't say I didn't warn you." Before Jack could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and felt a flicker of relief. It was Ellie. He gestured for Charlotte to leave, and she exited reluctantly, her disapproval hanging in the air. Jack answered the call, his tone brisk. "Ellie, have you made a decision?" There was a pause, and he could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but tinged with uncertainty. "I'll do it," she said, "but I have conditions." Jack's lips curved into a faint smile. "I'm listening." "First," Ellie began, "the community center comes first. You buy it, you save it, and you make sure it stays open. No loopholes, no fine print." "Done," Jack replied without hesitation. "What else?" "Second, this is strictly professional. No strings, no complications, and no expectations." "Understood." "And third," Ellie continued, her voice hardening, "your grandfather can never know this isn't real. If I'm going to lie to him, I need you to make sure it doesn't blow up in my face." Jack's smile faded slightly. "You have my word." Another pause. Then Ellie exhaled, the sound heavy with resignation. "Okay, let's do this." Jack's grip on the phone tightened, a strange mix of triumph and trepidation flooding his chest. "Good. I'll have the paperwork sent over tomorrow. We'll need to move quickly." As the call ended, Jack leaned back in his chair, his mind already racing with logistics. He should have felt relieved, even victorious. Instead, a small, nagging voice whispered at the edges of his thoughts, a voice he had spent years ignoring. What if this wasn't just business? What if he was opening a door he couldn't close? Ellie sat on her couch, staring at the blank wall in front of her. Grace was gone. The house was quiet, and the weight of her decision pressed down on her like a storm cloud. She thought of Jack's intense gaze, his confident words, and the unsettling sense of control he exuded. What had she just agreed to? Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen. It was a text from Grace. "Whatever happens, I've got your back. You're not doing this alone." Ellie smiled faintly, her heart aching with gratitude. But as she set the phone aside, another thought crept in, uninvited and unwelcome. What if Grace was wrong? What if, in the end, she really was alone? Ellie stood in front of the gleaming glass doors of Whitmore Tower, clutching her purse tightly. The opulent lobby behind the doors seemed like a portal to another world, a world she was about to step into, one she didn't fully understand. The gravity of her decision settled on her shoulders like a weight she could barely carry. A doorman opened the door, nodding politely. "Ms. Harper, Mr. Whitmore is expecting you." His calm demeanor only heightened her nerves. "Thank you," she murmured, stepping inside. The lobby was breathtaking. Marble floors so polished they reflected the crystal chandeliers above, abstract art adorning the walls, and a grand staircase sweeping upward like something out of a fairy tale. Ellie swallowed hard, feeling out of place in her modest black dress and sensible heels. Every step echoed, amplifying her self-consciousness. "Ellie." Jack's voice cut through the air, smooth and commanding. He stood at the edge of the lobby, his presence as magnetic as she remembered. Dressed in a tailored navy suit, he looked every bit the corporate kingpin, imposing, confident, and utterly unreachable. She straightened her posture, determined not to appear intimidated. Jack. His lips quirked into a faint smile as he walked toward her. "You're punctual. I like that." "I figured you'd appreciate efficiency," she replied, keeping her tone neutral. Jack gestured toward a private elevator. "Let's discuss the details upstairs." Ellie hesitated for a moment before following him. The elevator doors closed with a quiet whoosh, and the silence between them grew heavy. She could feel Jack's eyes on her, studying her like she was a chess piece he needed to place correctly on the board. "You're nervous," he said, breaking the silence. Ellie met his gaze, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "I'd be lying if I said I wasn't. This isn't exactly normal." Jack tilted his head slightly. "True. But then again, normal hasn't gotten you the results you need, has it?" His words struck a nerve, and Ellie bristled. "I'm not here because I failed, Jack. I'm here because I refuse to let the community center fail. There's a difference." A flicker of something, respect, passed across his face before he nodded. "Fair enough." The elevator dinged softly, and the doors slid open to reveal Jack's office. If the lobby had been impressive, this was a different level entirely. The expansive space was a blend of modern design and understated luxury, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Miami. The desk was sleek and minimalist, but the bookshelves lining one wall hinted at depth beyond the sterile aesthetic. "Have a seat," Jack said, gesturing to a pair of plush leather chairs near the window. Ellie complied, her eyes darting around the room as Jack retrieved a folder from his desk. He handed it to her, his expression unreadable. "This is the contract." Ellie opened the folder, her stomach tightening as she scanned the pages. The terms were clear and detailed. The marriage would last exactly 1 week, no physical or emotional expectations, and a strict non-disclosure agreement. In exchange, Jack would purchase the community center, ensuring its preservation indefinitely. "It's thorough," she said, her voice tinged with sarcasm. "You didn't miss a thing." "I don't believe in leaving room for misunderstandings," Jack replied, sitting across from her. His tone softened slightly. "This is a business arrangement, Ellie. Nothing more." Ellie's fingers tightened on the folder. "Your grandfather doesn't see it that way. How are we supposed to convince him this is real?" Jack's jaw tightened, and he leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Arthur's perceptive, but he's also hopeful. If we present a united front, he'll believe it." Ellie studied him, searching for cracks in his polished facade. "What happens if he doesn't?" Jack's eyes darkened, his voice dropping to a low, almost dangerous tone. "That's not an option." The weight of his words settled between them, and Ellie felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't just a transaction for Jack. It was personal. "I need time to read this," she said finally, closing the folder. "You have until tomorrow," Jack replied. "After that, we're on the clock." Ellie stood, clutching the folder to her chest. "Fine. But if I'm going to do this, I have one condition." Jack raised an eyebrow, his expression skeptical but intrigued. "And that is?" "You treat me like a person, not a pawn," Ellie said, her voice firm. "I'm helping you, Jack. Don't forget that." For a moment, Jack said nothing. Then, to her surprise, he nodded. "Deal." Ellie turned and walked toward the elevator, her heart pounding. She could feel Jack's gaze following her, but she refused to look back. The doors closed, sealing her inside the quiet, mirrored space, and she exhaled deeply. She had agreed to step into Jack Whitmore's world, but she wasn't sure she'd come out of it the same person. As soon as Ellie left, Jack sat back in his chair, his thoughts swirling. He prided himself on being in control, on anticipating every possible outcome. But Ellie Harper was a variable he couldn't quite predict. "Interesting choice," came a voice from the doorway. Jack glanced up to see Charlotte leaning against the frame, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. "Do you always eavesdrop, or is today special?" Charlotte smirked. "You left the door open. Besides, I wanted to see the woman who's going to help you pull off this ridiculous scheme." Jack frowned. "It's not a scheme. It's a solution." "Whatever you call it," Charlotte said, walking into the room. "She's different." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" "She's not like the women you usually surround yourself with," Charlotte said, her tone almost wistful. "She's real. That could either be your biggest advantage or your biggest mistake." Jack leaned forward, his gaze sharpening. "And what's your opinion?" Charlotte hesitated, her expression flickering between loyalty and something Jack couldn't quite place. "Just be careful, Jack. Not everyone plays the game the way you do." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Jack alone with his thoughts. Later that night, Ellie sat at her kitchen table, the contract spread out in front of her. Grace sat across from her, a half-empty glass of wine in her hand. "This is insane," Grace said for the 5th time. "You know that, right?" Ellie sighed, running a hand through her hair. "You think I don't? But what other choice do I have?" Grace shook her head, her expression torn. "I just don't want you to get hurt, Ellie. This guy, he's dangerous." "Dangerous how?" Ellie asked, her tone defensive. "Not in the usual way," Grace admitted. "But men like him, powerful, calculating, they don't let people in, they don't know how. If you get too close, you'll be the one who ends up burned." Ellie looked down at the contract, her resolve hardening. "This isn't about getting close. It's about saving the community center. That's all." Grace sighed, raising her glass in mock salute. "Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" "Don't fall for him." Ellie let out a dry laugh, though it felt hollow. "Trust me, that's the last thing on my mind." But as she signed her name on the dotted line, a tiny voice whispered in the back of her mind, filled with doubt. "What if you're wrong?" The Whitmore estate loomed ahead as the sleek black car rolled up the winding driveway. Ellie's heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing louder the closer they got. The estate was a stunning blend of modern architecture and timeless grandeur, a sprawling mansion surrounded by meticulously trimmed hedges, sparkling fountains, and a driveway so polished it reflected the cloudless sky. The car came to a smooth stop in front of the grand entrance, where massive oak doors framed by stone pillars stood like sentinels. Ellie hesitated, her hand hovering over the door handle. "You ready?" Jack's voice broke the silence, startling her. He sat beside her, his usual calm demeanor masking whatever thoughts were running through his mind. "Not even a little," Ellie admitted, trying to steady her breathing. She glanced at him, searching for reassurance, but his expression was unreadable. "Just follow my lead," Jack said, stepping out of the car. The driver opened Ellie's door, and she followed reluctantly, feeling woefully out of place as her heels clicked against the stone driveway. The moment she stepped inside, the grandeur of the mansion hit her like a tidal wave. High ceilings adorned with intricate chandeliers, walls lined with priceless artwork, and a sweeping staircase that seemed to stretch into eternity. It was the kind of place she'd only seen in movies, and now she was supposed to act like she belonged here. "Jack," a warm, slightly strained voice called from the far side of the foyer. Ellie turned to see an older man being wheeled toward them. His silver hair was neatly combed, and though he looked frail, his piercing blue eyes radiated intelligence and strength. This was Arthur Whitmore, the man whose approval they needed to secure. "Grandfather," Jack greeted him, his tone softer than Ellie had ever heard before. He stepped forward, leaning down to clasp Arthur's hand briefly before gesturing toward Ellie. "This is Ellie Harper, my fiancée." Ellie froze for half a second, but she quickly recovered, stepping forward with a warm smile. "It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Whitmore." "Arthur," he corrected, his gaze sharp as it swept over her. "And the honor is mine, Ellie. Jack's been telling me about you." "Oh, has he?" Ellie said, her smile tightening. She shot Jack a quick look, wondering what exactly he had told his grandfather. Arthur chuckled, the sound warm despite his obvious frailty. "Not enough, I suspect. Come, sit with me. Let's get to know each other." Jack gave Ellie a small nod, silently encouraging her to follow. She moved toward the sitting area where Arthur's wheelchair was positioned next to a luxurious sofa. Taking a seat, she felt Jack settle beside her, his presence a steady anchor in the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. Arthur leaned back in his chair, his sharp eyes never leaving Ellie's face. "Tell me, Ellie, what drew you to my grandson? He's not exactly the easiest man to love." Ellie's breath caught in her throat. The question, though posed lightly, felt like a spotlight had been turned on her. She forced a small laugh, her mind scrambling for an answer. "Well," she began, glancing at Jack for help, but he simply raised an eyebrow, clearly curious to hear what she would say. "Jack surprises me. He has this way of making you see things differently, of challenging you to be better." Arthur tilted his head, his expression thoughtful. "Is that so?" Ellie nodded, her heart racing. "He's not just about business. Beneath all that intensity, he has a strong sense of responsibility. It's inspiring." Arthur's gaze flicked to Jack, a faint smile playing at his lips. "She's good for you, Jack. I can already tell." Jack, to Ellie's surprise, shifted uncomfortably. "We're good for each other," he said simply, his voice lacking its usual edge. Arthur's smile widened. "That's all I've ever wanted for you, Jack. Someone who balances you, someone who reminds you of what truly matters." Ellie felt a pang of guilt twist in her chest. This man, so genuine in his affection for Jack, had no idea the entire relationship was a facade. She stole a glance at Jack, wondering if he felt even a fraction of the weight pressing down on her. A soft knock interrupted the moment, and a woman in her late 40s entered the room. Her presence was commanding, her tailored dress and perfectly coiffed hair screaming authority. She carried a tray of tea with a precision that suggested years of experience. "Mr. Whitmore, shall I serve tea now?" she asked, her tone crisp but respectful. "Yes, thank you, Margaret," Arthur replied warmly. "Ellie, this is Margaret, our estate manager. She's been with us for years, practically family." Ellie smiled politely. "It's lovely to meet you." Margaret's gaze lingered on Ellie for a moment longer than necessary, her expression unreadable. "Likewise," she said, before stepping away. Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that Margaret was sizing her up, analyzing every word and movement. The sensation left her uneasy, but she pushed it aside as Arthur turned back to her. "Ellie, I hear you're quite passionate about the community centre you're trying to save," Arthur said, his tone encouraging. "I am," Ellie said, grateful for the shift in topic. She launched into an explanation of the centre's importance, her words spilling out with a fervour she couldn't suppress. She spoke about the children who found safety there, the families who relied on its resources, and the sense of belonging it brought to the neighbourhood. Arthur listened intently, his expression softening as she spoke. "You have a good heart," he said when she finished. "It's rare to find someone who fights so fiercely for others." Ellie's cheeks flushed, and she glanced at Jack, who was watching her with an unreadable expression. "Thank you, Arthur. That means a lot." As the conversation continued, Margaret reappeared, her sharp eyes darting between Jack and Ellie. She lingered just long enough to pour tea before retreating to a corner of the room, her presence a subtle but constant reminder that Ellie was being watched. Arthur eventually grew tired, and Jack wheeled him back toward his room, leaving Ellie alone in the sitting area. She took a deep breath, letting the silence settle around her. "Miss Harper," Margaret's voice broke the quiet, making Ellie jump. The older woman stepped closer, her tone polite but tinged with something Ellie couldn't quite place. "A word of advice, if I may." Ellie straightened, her pulse quickening. "Of course." "Mr. Whitmore is particular about the people he lets into his life," Margaret said, her gaze piercing. "He values loyalty above all else. I hope you understand what's at stake." Ellie nodded, her throat tightening. "I do." Margaret's lips curved into a faint smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Good. Then we won't have any problems." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Ellie to wonder whether the warning was meant for her or for Jack. The morning light poured through the vast windows of the Whitmore Estates dining room, casting a golden glow on the elegant space. Ellie sat at the long table, the untouched cup of tea in front of her growing cold. Her thoughts were a tangle of anxiety, guilt, and anticipation. Jack sat across from her, sipping coffee with his usual composed demeanor, scanning something on his phone. The silence between them stretched uncomfortably, broken only by the faint rustle of the morning paper Arthur was reading at the far end of the table. Ellie cleared her throat, her voice hesitant. "Your grandfather seems to really believe in us." Jack didn't look up, his thumb scrolling through the screen. "That's the point." She frowned, the frustration simmering just beneath her calm tone. "I mean, he really believes. It's not just about keeping up appearances for him. This is real." Finally, Jack set his phone down, his piercing gaze locking onto hers. "It has to be real, Ellie, or this doesn't work." She opened her mouth to reply, but stopped when Arthur folded his newspaper and looked at them both with a smile. "Good morning, lovebirds." Ellie tensed, her cheeks warming as she forced a smile. "Good morning, Arthur." "Sleep well?" Arthur asked, his tone light, but his sharp eyes flicking between them with interest. Ellie hesitated. "Yes, very well, thank you." Jack, ever the master of composure, leaned back in his chair with an easy smile. "Ellie was just telling me how much she loves the sunrise here." Arthur chuckled, his expression softening. "It's one of the perks of this place. You can see the world waking up from right here. It reminds you what you're working for." He paused, his gaze turning thoughtful. "And who you're working for." Ellie swallowed hard, her stomach twisting with guilt. Arthur's words carried a weight she wasn't prepared to bear. She glanced at Jack, but his face remained unreadable, a fortress of control she couldn't breach. Arthur leaned forward slightly, his tone conspiratorial. "You know, when I first met my wife, she couldn't stand me." Ellie blinked, caught off guard by the sudden shift. "Really?" "Oh, yes," Arthur said, a glimmer of mischief in his eyes. "She thought I was arrogant, insufferable, and far too sure of myself. And she was right, of course. But I knew, from the moment I saw her, that she was the one." Ellie smiled despite herself. "How did you change her mind?" Arthur grinned. Persistence, charm, and a lot of luck. She eventually saw the man behind the arrogance. Or maybe she just got tired of arguing with me. The room filled with soft laughter, and Ellie felt a pang of sadness at the warmth in Arthur's voice. He spoke of his wife with such love, such reverence. It was the kind of love that couldn't be faked. Before she could dwell on it, Arthur's expression turned serious. "The point is, relationships are never perfect. They take work. But when it's the right person, it's worth every effort." Ellie nodded, her throat tightening. She sounds like an incredible woman. She was, Arthur said softly, his gaze distant. Then he snapped out of his reverie and clapped his hands together. Enough of my rambling. What are you two lovebirds doing today? Jack glanced at Ellie, his expression unreadable. I was thinking we'd go out, spend some time together. Arthur's smile widened. Good. Go enjoy yourselves. You've got my blessing to take the day off, Jack. Jack gave a small nod. Thank you, grandfather. Ellie didn't miss the way Arthur's gaze lingered on them as they rose from the table. There was hope in his eyes, hope she wasn't sure she deserved. The tension between Ellie and Jack was palpable as they stepped into the sleek black car waiting outside the estate. The driver closed the door behind them, and the silence inside the car was deafening. Where are we going? Ellie asked, her voice tight. Into the city, Jack replied curtly. If Arthur believes we're spending the day together, we might as well make it convincing. Ellie bit back a retort, her frustration bubbling under the surface. Do you always approach life like it's a strategy meeting? Jack's gaze flicked to her, his eyes sharp. You agreed to this, Ellie. Don't start questioning the plan now. She leaned back against the leather seat, crossing her arms. I'm not questioning the plan. I'm questioning you. His jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. The silence between them felt like a storm waiting to break. The car stopped in front of a bustling outdoor market, its colourful stalls and lively atmosphere a stark contrast to the tension between them. Jack stepped out first, offering Ellie his hand. She hesitated, but took it, forcing herself to play the part. As they walked through the market, vendors called out to them, their voices blending with the hum of the crowd. Ellie couldn't help but notice the way Jack's hand rested lightly on her back, guiding her through the throng of people. It felt strangely natural, even as her mind rebelled against the thought. Ellie, Jack said suddenly, his tone softer than before. What Arthur said at breakfast, it seemed to hit a nerve. She looked up at him, startled by the shift in his demeanor. It's just, he really believes in us, and I hate lying to him. Jack's expression hardened. You're not lying. You're helping him hold on to something he values. There's a difference. Is there? Ellie asked, her voice tinged with bitterness. Because it feels the same to me. Jack stopped walking, turning to face her. The noise of the market faded as he held her gaze. Ellie, I've spent my entire life doing what's expected of me. This isn't about lying. It's about survival. For both of us. His words hung in the air, and for a moment, Ellie saw a flicker of vulnerability beneath his steely exterior. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the controlled facade she was coming to recognize. Jack! A voice called from behind them, shattering the moment. Ellie turned to see a man approaching, his confident stride and charming smile impossible to ignore. He was tall, with dark hair and sharp features, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit despite the casual setting. His eyes sparkled with amusement as he reached them. Graham, Jack said, his tone cold. What are you doing here? I could ask you the same thing, Graham replied smoothly, his gaze shifting to Ellie. And who's this? Ellie felt a wave of unease as Graham extended a hand to her. She shook it reluctantly, her instincts screaming that this man was trouble. Ellie Harper, she said, Jack's fiancée. Graham's smile widened, but there was something predatory in his eyes. Fiancée, huh? That's unexpected. Is it? Jack asked, his tone sharp. You've never known me to do anything without a reason. Graham chuckled, his amusement genuine. True, but I can't help wondering what the reason is this time. Ellie glanced at Jack, her unease growing as the tension between the two men crackled like a live wire. It was clear that Graham wasn't just a casual acquaintance, he was something far more dangerous. "Well," Graham said, his smile never faltering, "I won't keep you. But let's catch up soon, Jack. I have a feeling we have a lot to talk about." He turned and walked away, leaving Ellie and Jack standing in the middle of the market. Ellie turned to Jack, her voice low but firm. "Who is he?" Jack's expression darkened. "Someone you don't need to worry about." Ellie frowned, her frustration boiling over. "You can't keep shutting me out, Jack. If I'm supposed to help you, I need to know what I'm dealing with." Jack hesitated, his jaw tightening before he finally spoke. "Graham Langston. He's an old rival, and he's not someone you want to trust." Ellie's heart sank, the weight of their arrangement pressing down on her. She had stepped into Jack's world, but she was beginning to realize just how dangerous it could be. The evening air was heavy with tension as Ellie sat alone on the grand terrace of the Whitmore estate. The lights of Miami sparkled in the distance, a dazzling contrast to the unease swirling in her chest. She traced the rim of her untouched wineglass, her mind racing with thoughts of the day's events. Graham Langston. Even his name sent a chill down her spine. There was something about his smooth charm and calculated demeanor that felt deeply unsettling, and Jack's reaction, sharp, defensive, and deliberately vague, only made things worse. She heard the faint sound of footsteps and turned to see Jack stepping onto the terrace. His tie was loosened, and the tension in his face made him look almost human, a glimpse of vulnerability beneath his usual armor. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. Ellie shook her head. "Too much on my mind." Jack nodded and joined her at the table, pouring himself a glass of wine. The silence stretched between them, heavy and unspoken, until Ellie finally broke it. "Why didn't you tell me about Graham?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with frustration. Jack sighed, swirling the wine in his glass. "Because he's irrelevant. He's a distraction I don't have time for." Ellie frowned. He didn't feel irrelevant today. He felt dangerous. Jack's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. "Graham thrives on creating chaos. That's his game. The less attention you give him, the less power he has." Ellie leaned forward, her gaze unyielding. "You can't keep shutting me out, Jack. If I'm supposed to help you, if we're in this together, I need to know what's really going on." Jack met her gaze, his expression conflicted. For a moment she thought he might brush her off again, but then he exhaled deeply, as if surrendering to the weight of her words. "Graham was a friend once," Jack began, his tone measured. "Or at least, I thought he was. We started in business around the same time, both hungry to prove ourselves. But Graham, he doesn't play by the rules. He'll cut corners, exploit people, do whatever it takes to win." Ellie listened intently, her frustration giving way to curiosity. "What happened between you two?" Jack's grip tightened on his glass. "We were competing for the same deal, a major acquisition that could have changed the course of both our careers. I won, but barely. And Graham, he didn't take it well. Since then, he's made it his mission to undermine me whenever he can." Ellie's stomach churned. "So he's a threat." Jack nodded, his expression grim. "He'll try to find a weakness and exploit it. That's why I need you to stay out of his way." Ellie bristled at his tone. "I'm not a liability, Jack. I can handle myself." "This isn't about handling yourself," Jack shot back, his voice sharper than he intended. "It's about not giving him ammunition. He'll twist anything he can to hurt me, or you." Ellie stared at him, her anger flaring. "Maybe if you trusted me, I wouldn't have to figure all of this out on my own." Jack's face softened, and he looked away, the tension in his shoulders easing. "You're right. I should have told you sooner. I didn't want to drag you into this mess." Ellie's heart ached at the vulnerability in his voice, but she refused to let it cloud her judgment. "We're already in this, Jack, together, so stop shutting me out." Jack nodded, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "Okay, no more secrets." The moment hung between them. A fragile truce formed in the quiet of the terrace. Ellie leaned back, her mind still racing, but a flicker of trust had begun to take root. The next morning, the estate was buzzing with activity. Arthur had invited a group of prominent philanthropists for a luncheon, and the staff were working tirelessly to prepare. Ellie found herself swept into the chaos, her nerves prickling as she realized this was another test of their charade. Jack appeared in the hallway, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, his demeanor as unflappable as ever. "Ready to put on a show?" he asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Ellie forced a smile. "Do I have a choice?" "Not really," Jack replied, his lips curving into a faint smirk. "Just remember, charm them, make them believe. That's all we need." Ellie rolled her eyes but followed him into the grand dining room, where Arthur was already seated at the head of the table. The guests began to arrive in a flurry of handshakes and polite laughter, their conversations a symphony of wealth and power. Ellie did her best to navigate the room, offering warm smiles and engaging in light conversation. But she couldn't shake the feeling that every pair of eyes was scrutinizing her, questioning her place in this world. "Ellie," Arthur called, beckoning her to his side. She approached, her heart pounding, as he gestured to an older woman with sharp features and a dazzling necklace. "I'd like you to meet Vivian Parker, an old family friend." Ellie extended her hand, hoping her smile didn't betray her nerves. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Parker." Vivian took her hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "The pleasure is mine, dear. I've heard so much about you." Ellie's smile faltered. "Oh? All good, I hope." Vivian's eyes sparkled with a hint of mischief. "Of course. Arthur speaks very highly of you. And Jack, well, let's just say he seems quite taken." Ellie's cheeks flushed and she glanced at Jack, who was deep in conversation across the room. "He's full of surprises." Vivian chuckled, her gaze turning shrewd. "Indeed, but surprises can be dangerous, my dear. Be careful not to lose yourself in someone else's story." Ellie's heart sank, the weight of Vivian's words settling in her chest. She nodded politely and excused herself, retreating to the terrace for a moment of solitude. But solitude was the last thing she found. As she stepped outside, she spotted Graham leaning casually against the railing, his sharp suit and charming smile as polished as ever. "Ellie," he said smoothly, "we meet again." Her stomach twisted, but she kept her expression neutral. "Graham, what are you doing here?" He shrugged, his smile never wavering. "I was invited. Arthur and I go way back." Ellie folded her arms, her voice firm. "What do you want?" Graham's smile turned colder, his eyes glinting with something darker. "Just a friendly chat. You seem out of place here. Tell me, how did you and Jack meet?" Ellie's pulse quickened, but she held her ground. "That's none of your business." "Isn't it?" Graham asked, stepping closer. "You're in Jack's life now, which means you're in mine, and I make it my business to know everything about my competition." Ellie's jaw tightened, but before she could respond, Jack's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Graham," Jack said, his tone icy, "leave her alone." Graham turned, his smile widening. "Jack, always so protective." Jack stepped between them, his posture tense. "This isn't a game, Graham. Stay out of it." Graham chuckled, his gaze flicking between them. "If you say so. But something tells me this story is far from over." With that, he walked away, leaving Ellie and Jack standing in the aftermath of his presence. Jack turned to Ellie, his expression uncharacteristically soft. "Are you okay?" he asked. Ellie nodded, though her hands were still trembling. "I'm fine." Jack's jaw tightened, and he placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice low. "I won't let him hurt you, Ellie." "I promise." Ellie searched his eyes, the sincerity in his voice stirring something deep within her. For the first time, she wondered if there was more to Jack than the man she thought she knew. The evening air inside the Whitmore estate carried an unspoken tension that seemed to settle in every corner of the grand hall. The soft glow of chandeliers reflected off polished marble floors, but for all its opulence, the mansion felt colder than ever. Ellie paced in her room, her hands wringing as she replayed her encounter with Graham. His veiled threats, his piercing gaze, the unmistakable menace in his tone. It had all unsettled her more than she cared to admit. She stopped abruptly, staring out the window at the sprawling gardens below. The moon cast a pale light over the estate, and the distant hum of the fountain was the only sound breaking the stillness. Her thoughts churned relentlessly, a storm of doubts and questions. Why had Graham been invited? And why hadn't Jack told her everything about their history from the start? A knock on her door made her jump. "It's me!" Jack's voice came through, firm but not unkind. "Can I come in?" Ellie hesitated, but she crossed the room and opened the door. Jack stood there, his tie loosened, his expression unusually soft. He stepped inside, and Ellie closed the door behind him, leaning against it as she crossed her arms. "What do you want, Jack?" she asked, her tone sharper than she intended. Jack's jaw tightened, but he didn't snap back. Instead, he leaned against the edge of her desk, folding his arms as he met her gaze. "I wanted to make sure you're okay," he said simply. Ellie let out a humorless laugh, shaking her head. "You're checking on me? After everything today? You could have warned me, Jack, about Graham, about how dangerous he is. Instead, I've been walking around blind, wondering what kind of mess I've gotten myself into." Jack's eyes darkened, a flicker of guilt crossing his face. "I didn't think he'd approach you." "That's not good enough," Ellie snapped, her voice rising. "You keep saying I'm part of this, that we're a team, but you keep shutting me out when it matters. How am I supposed to trust you if you won't even let me in?" Jack stood abruptly, his hands gripping the edge of the desk. "You think this is easy for me?" he said, his voice low but charged with emotion. "You think I like dragging you into this? Every day I'm trying to keep everything from falling apart. This deal, my grandfather's faith in me, and now Graham showing up to complicate everything. I didn't want to put you in the crossfire, Ellie." "But you did," Ellie countered, stepping closer. "You did, Jack. And now I'm here, trying to figure out if I can even trust the man I'm supposed to pretend to be in love with." Her words seemed to cut deep. Jack's shoulders sagged slightly, and for a moment he looked almost vulnerable. He ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. "I'm trying," he said quietly, "but trust doesn't come easy for me. It never has." Ellie's anger softened, but her resolve didn't waver. "Then let me help you, Jack. Stop trying to carry this all on your own. If we're going to make this work, we have to do it together." Jack met her gaze, something shifting in his eyes. For a moment, the mask he always wore slipped, and Ellie caught a glimpse of the man beneath, the man who was trying so hard to protect everyone around him while keeping himself locked away. "I'll try," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Ellie nodded, her heart pounding. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The next morning, the Whitmore estate buzzed with anticipation. Arthur had invited a group of close family friends for a dinner party, a gathering meant to showcase Jack and Ellie's relationship. It was another test, another chance to prove their charade was flawless. Ellie stood in front of the mirror, smoothing the deep green dress she'd chosen for the evening. The fabric hugged her frame perfectly, and the color brought out the warmth in her eyes, but no amount of elegance could calm the storm in her chest. "Ready?" Jack's voice came from the doorway. She turned to see him standing there, impeccably dressed in a black suit that seemed tailor-made for him. His eyes lingered on her for a moment, something unreadable flickering in their depths. "You look stunning," he said, his voice softer than usual. Ellie felt a faint blush rise to her cheeks, but she pushed it aside. "Thanks. You're not too bad yourself." Jack smirked, offering his arm. "Shall we?" Ellie hesitated before slipping her hand into his. The warmth of his touch steadied her nerves, but only slightly. Together they descended the grand staircase, stepping into the bustling dining room where Arthur and the guests were gathered. The room buzzed with laughter and conversation, but Ellie felt every pair of eyes on her as they entered. Jack's grip on her hand tightened slightly, a silent reassurance, as they made their way to Arthur's side. "Ah, there they are," Arthur said warmly, his face lighting up as he saw them. "Our favorite couple." Ellie forced a smile, the weight of the charade pressing down on her. She glanced at Jack, who seemed effortlessly composed, and wondered how he managed to keep his walls up so easily. Throughout the evening, Ellie found herself engaging in polite conversation, deflecting questions about their relationship with practiced ease. But her composure faltered when Graham entered the room, his presence like a dark cloud. "Ellie," Graham said smoothly as he approached, his smile disarming but his eyes cold. "It's good to see you again." Jack appeared at her side in an instant, his expression hardening. "Graham, I didn't realize you'd be joining us tonight." "Arthur insisted," Graham replied, his tone casual but laced with malice. "And who am I to refuse an invitation from an old friend?" Ellie felt Jack's tension beside her, his hand moving to the small of her back. The protective gesture sent a shiver down her spine, but it also reminded her of the precarious position they were in. "Graham," Arthur called from across the room, "come join us for a toast." Graham flashed a charming smile. "Of course." As he walked away, Ellie turned to Jack, her voice low. "Why is he here?" Jack's jaw clenched, his gaze fixed on Graham. "He's testing me. He wants me to lose my composure." "Don't let him," Ellie said firmly. "You're stronger than he is, Jack." Jack looked at her, his expression softening. "Thank you." The rest of the evening passed in a blur, the tension between Jack and Graham simmering beneath the surface. But as the guests began to leave, Graham approached Ellie one last time, his voice low and dangerous. "Careful, Ellie," he murmured, his smile sharp. "You're playing a dangerous game." Ellie's heart pounded as she watched him walk away, his words echoing in her mind. She turned to Jack, her resolve hardening. "We have to end this, Jack," she said. "Whatever Graham's planning, we need to stop him before it's too late." Jack nodded, his expression dark. "We will. Together." Ellie wasn't sure if she believed him, but she knew one thing for certain. The game they were playing had just become far more dangerous, and the stakes were higher than ever. The Whitmore estate was unusually quiet the next morning, but it was the kind of silence that carried tension, like the moments before a storm. Ellie sat at the breakfast table, absently stirring her coffee, as her mind replayed Graham's cryptic warning from the night before. "You're playing a dangerous game." The words clung to her like a shadow. She didn't need Graham's ominous tone to remind her that her situation with Jack was precarious. But there was something about his confidence, something that made her chest tighten with dread. He wasn't bluffing. She could feel it. "Ellie," Jack's voice broke through her thoughts. She looked up to see him standing in the doorway, his expression unusually guarded. "We need to talk." She set her coffee down, her nerves spiking. "What's wrong?" Jack glanced around the room, then gestured for her to follow him. They walked in silence through the sprawling halls until they reached his office. Jack closed the door behind them and turned to face her, his usual composure cracking just enough to reveal the strain beneath. "I had someone look into Graham after last night," he began, his voice low. "He's been making moves, quietly but deliberately, acquiring small shares in Whitmore Enterprises through intermediaries." Ellie's stomach dropped. "What does that mean?" "It means he's trying to position himself," Jack said, pacing, "to disrupt the company, to create leverage against me." Ellie crossed her arms, her mind racing. Why now? Why not years ago? Jack stopped pacing, his gaze locking onto hers. "Because of us." She blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "Graham thinks our engagement is a weakness," Jack explained. "He thinks you're my Achilles heel, that if he can get to you, he can get to me." Ellie's breath caught, the weight of his words pressing down on her like a vice. "That's insane." "It's Graham," Jack said, his tone bitter. "Insane is his specialty." Ellie shook her head, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. "That's why he approached me last night. He's trying to manipulate me, to make me doubt you." "And it's working," Jack said, his voice soft but edged with frustration. "Isn't it?" Ellie froze, his words hitting closer to home than she wanted to admit. She looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "You haven't exactly given me reasons to trust you, Jack." The silence that followed was deafening. Jack leaned against his desk, running a hand through his hair, the vulnerability in his posture stark against his usual confidence. "You're right," he admitted, his voice low. "I've been holding back, keeping you in the dark, but not because I don't trust you, because I don't want you to get hurt." Ellie's chest tightened, a mix of frustration and something softer swirling inside her. "Jack, you can't protect me from everything, and you can't keep shutting me out. We're supposed to be in this together." Jack looked at her, his eyes searching hers. For a moment, the room felt impossibly small, the space between them charged with something unspoken. "Then let's start now," he said finally. "No more secrets." Ellie nodded, her resolve hardening. "Okay, no more secrets." Later that day, Ellie found herself in the gardens, hoping the fresh air would clear her mind. The estate's sprawling grounds were breathtaking, lush greenery, vibrant flowers, and a series of stone pathways winding through it all. But even the beauty couldn't calm the storm inside her. She stopped by the fountain, the sound of trickling water soothing her frayed nerves, but her peace was short-lived. "Ellie," a voice called, smooth and familiar. She turned to see Graham leaning casually against a nearby tree, his presence as unwelcome as ever. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her tone sharper than she intended. Graham smirked, pushing off the tree and strolling toward her. "Relax, I was invited. Arthur and I go way back, remember?" Ellie crossed her arms, refusing to let him rattle her. "What do you want, Graham?" Graham stopped a few feet away, his smile fading as his eyes turned cold. "I want to make you an offer." Ellie raised an eyebrow, her suspicion mounting. "I'm not interested." "You haven't even heard it yet," Graham said, his tone deceptively pleasant. "You help me take Jack down, and I'll make sure the community centre gets everything it needs. Funding, renovations, expansion, you name it." Ellie's breath caught, the temptation of his words cutting through her resolve. But she quickly shook her head, her voice firm. "I'd never betray Jack, and I don't need your money." Graham chuckled, the sound devoid of humour. "Loyalty's a nice sentiment, Ellie. But it won't protect you when Jack's world comes crashing down. And trust me, it will." "Then I guess we're done here," Ellie said, stepping past him. But Graham's voice stopped her in her tracks. "You're making a mistake." Ellie turned, her gaze fierce. "The only mistake I made was giving you the time of day. Graham's smirk returned, but there was something darker in his eyes. "We'll see." Ellie didn't respond. She walked away, her heart pounding, her mind racing with the implications of Graham's words. That evening, Ellie found Jack in the study, hunched over his desk, a series of documents spread out before him. He looked up as she entered, the tension in his face softening slightly. "Graham approached me again," Ellie said, not bothering with pleasantries. Jack's expression darkened. "What did he say?" "He tried to bribe me," Ellie replied, her voice steady. "Offered to fund the community centre if I turned on you." Jack's jaw clenched, his hands curling into fists. "That bastard!" Ellie stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "I told him no." Jack looked up at her, his eyes searching hers for any trace of doubt. "Why?" Ellie hesitated, her voice softening. "Because I believe in what we're doing, and because I believe in you." Jack's shoulders relaxed, the tension draining from his body. He stood, stepping closer to her, the space between them shrinking. "Ellie," he began, his voice low, "I know I haven't made this easy. But I need you to know I'm not just doing this for the company, or for Arthur." Ellie's breath caught, her heart pounding as Jack's words hung in the air. For the first time, she saw something in his eyes she couldn't ignore, something real. "Then what are you doing it for?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack hesitated, the vulnerability in his expression breaking through his usual composure. "For us." The words hit her like a tidal wave, and for a moment the weight of everything else faded away. But before she could respond, the sound of footsteps outside the study broke the moment. Arthur appeared in the doorway, his expression serious. "Jack, Ellie, we need to talk." The gravity in his tone sent a chill down Ellie's spine. She exchanged a glance with Jack before they followed Arthur to the sitting room where Margaret stood waiting, her usual calm demeanour replaced with unease. "What's going on?" Jack asked, his voice sharp. Arthur sighed, his gaze heavy. "It's Graham. He's escalated, and we're running out of time." Ellie's chest tightened, the storm she had been bracing for finally breaking. Arthur's sitting room, usually a warm and inviting space, felt oppressive as Jack, Ellie, and Margaret gathered around. The air seemed heavier, weighed down by Arthur's somber expression. He leaned forward in his chair, his hands clasped tightly as though he were bracing himself for what he was about to say. Margaret, standing near the fireplace, cleared her throat. "We've received word that Graham has scheduled a press conference. It's happening tomorrow." Ellie frowned, her pulse quickening. "A press conference? About what?" Arthur's lips pressed into a thin line. "About you, Ellie. About your engagement to Jack." The word sent a jolt through Ellie, her breath catching. What do you mean?" Margaret stepped closer, her tone even but laced with urgency. "Graham has been digging into your past. He's uncovered information. He plans to question the legitimacy of your relationship and frame you as a gold digger, taking advantage of Jack and the Whitmore family." Ellie's stomach dropped. Her legs felt unsteady, and she gripped the back of a chair to keep from collapsing. "This can't be happening." "It is," Jack said, his voice like steel. He turned to Arthur, his jaw set. "How credible is the information he has?" Arthur sighed, his expression heavy. "Graham doesn't act unless he's sure. If he's holding this press conference, it means he thinks he has enough to hurt you. And Ellie." Jack's fists clenched at his sides, a storm brewing behind his eyes. "He won't get away with this." Ellie shook her head, her voice trembling. "How? How do we stop him? He has the power, the resources, and he knows how to manipulate people." Jack stepped closer to her, his gaze intense. "We fight back. We don't give him the chance to take control of the narrative. Margaret interjected, her tone firm. The only way to counter this is to stay ahead of him. We need to go public before he does. Show a united front. Make the world believe in your relationship before Graham can tear it apart. Ellie's heart pounded, the enormity of the situation closing in around her. And if we can't? If people don't believe us? Jack's voice softened, but his resolve was unshakable. Then we prove them wrong. Together. Ellie looked at him, searching his face for any sign of doubt. But all she saw was determination, and something else she couldn't quite name. Something that made her want to believe him, even as her fear threatened to consume her. Arthur cleared his throat, his tone gentle but firm. Ellie, I know this isn't what you signed up for, but I believe in you. I see the way you've handled yourself, the way you've stood by Jack. You're stronger than you think. Ellie's throat tightened, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. She nodded, forcing herself to stand taller. Okay, what do we do? Jack placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch grounding her. First, we make sure Graham doesn't have anything else up his sleeve. Margaret, reach out to our legal team. I want everything he's planning scrutinized. Margaret nodded. Already in motion. And we'll hold our own press event, Jack continued. Tomorrow morning before Graham's conference, we'll get ahead of the story. Ellie swallowed hard, her voice shaking. You want me to speak publicly? To face the media? Jack's hand tightened on her shoulder, his voice steady. We'll do it together. I won't let you face this alone. For the first time in days, Ellie felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to hold on to. The next morning came too quickly. Ellie stood in the green room of a lavish hotel ballroom where Jack's press team had arranged the event. The hum of activity around her, assistants, makeup artists and publicists darting in and out, only heightened her anxiety. Her palms were clammy, her heart racing as she stared at her reflection in the mirror. You've got this, Grace's voice came from the doorway. Ellie turned to see her best friend stepping inside, her presence a welcome balm to her frayed nerves. Grace, Ellie whispered, her voice breaking. I don't know if I can do this. Grace crossed the room in a few quick strides, pulling Ellie into a hug. Yes, you can. You're stronger than you think, and you're not alone. Jack's out there, ready to stand by you. Ellie nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. Thank you for being here. Always, Grace said, squeezing her hand. Now go show them who you are. Ellie took a deep breath, steeling herself as she stepped out of the green room. Jack was waiting for her by the stage, his presence commanding even in the chaotic atmosphere. He turned as she approached, his eyes softening when they met hers. You ready? He asked, his voice low. No, Ellie admitted, but I'm doing it anyway. Jack's lips quirked into a faint smile. That's all that matters. He extended his hand, and she took it, drawing strength from his steady grip. Together, they stepped onto the stage, the bright lights blinding at first. The room was packed with reporters, their cameras and microphones pointed directly at them. Jack opened the press conference with a commanding presence, addressing the audience with confidence and ease. He spoke about their relationship, their shared goals, and the strength they found in each other. Ellie listened, her nerves slowly giving way to a strange sense of calm. Then it was her turn. She stepped forward, the room seeming to close in around her. But as she looked out at the sea of faces, she remembered Grace's words. She wasn't alone. Jack was beside her, and so was the truth. Jack and I may not have met under the most conventional circumstances, she began, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. But what we've built together is real. We've faced challenges, doubts, and scrutiny, but through it all, we've found strength in each other. Her gaze swept over the room, finding Jack's reassuring presence beside her. "I know there are questions, and I'm here to answer them. But one thing I need you all to know is that our relationship isn't about appearances. It's about trust, respect, and standing together, no matter what comes our way." The room fell silent for a beat, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Then, slowly, applause began to ripple through the crowd. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make Ellie feel like they had won a small victory. As the conference ended and the reporters began to file out, Jack turned to Ellie, his expression filled with something she hadn't seen before. Pride. "You were incredible," he said, his voice soft. Ellie managed a small smile, her heart still pounding. "I just told the truth. And that's why they believed you," Jack said, his gaze holding hers. "Because you're real." The moment lingered, something unspoken passing between them. But before either of them could say more, Margaret appeared, her expression grave. "Graham's press conference is starting," she said, "and you'll want to see this." Ellie's stomach dropped, the fragile hope she'd clung to suddenly slipping away. Jack's jaw tightened, his resolve hardening as he turned to follow Margaret. The storm wasn't over. It was just beginning. The screen in the Whitmore Estates conference room flickered to life, revealing Graham Langston standing at a podium. His smug expression and impeccable suit made him look every inch the charismatic businessman he wanted the world to see. A crowd of reporters surrounded him, cameras flashing as he adjusted the microphone. Ellie sat frozen in her chair, Jack beside her, his jaw tight and his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles turned white. Arthur sat at the head of the table, his usual calm demeanor replaced with a grim focus. Graham cleared his throat, his voice smooth as he began to speak. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming." The room on their end was silent, every word that Graham spoke filling it like a storm cloud gathering overhead. "I called this press conference to address something that I believe the public and Whitmore Enterprises stakeholders deserve to know," Graham continued, his tone almost conspiratorial. "Transparency is a value I hold dear, and unfortunately, I believe it's a value that's been lacking in recent events." Ellie's heart pounded as Graham paused, his eyes scanning the room of reporters, soaking in the attention. He was toying with them, dragging it out to build tension, and it was working. "It's come to my attention," Graham said, his voice dropping slightly, "that the engagement between Jack Whitmore and Ellie Harper may not be as genuine as it appears." A collective murmur rippled through the reporters. Ellie's stomach twisted as her worst fears began to materialize on the screen. Jack sat rigid beside her, his expression like stone, but the storm in his eyes was unmistakable. "Over the past weeks, I've conducted my own investigation into Ms. Harper," Graham went on, his words slow and deliberate. "What I've found raises serious questions about her intentions." Ellie gripped the arm of her chair, her breath catching as Graham produced a folder, holding it up for the cameras to see. "This," he said, tapping the folder dramatically, "is a compilation of evidence that suggests Ms. Harper has significant financial motives for aligning herself with Mr. Whitmore. From mounting personal debts to her failed attempts to save the community center in her neighborhood, it's clear she stands to gain a great deal from her connection to the Whitmore family." "No," Ellie whispered, her voice barely audible. Her chest tightened, the air around her feeling suddenly too thin. "That bastard," Jack muttered under his breath, his voice low and laced with fury. Graham opened the folder, pulling out what looked like documents, records, photos, anything he could twist into his narrative. "I'm not saying these are definitive conclusions," Graham said, his tone mockingly humble. "But I do believe these are questions worth asking. After all, Whitmore Enterprises is a symbol of integrity. Its leadership must reflect those values." Ellie stood abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. She couldn't watch anymore. The room felt suffocating, Graham's words echoing in her mind like a cruel taunt. Without looking at anyone, she hurried toward the door. "Ellie," Jack called after her, but she didn't stop. She needed air. She needed to think. She needed to get away from the feeling that her entire world was collapsing. Ellie leaned against the balcony railing, her hands trembling as she stared out at the sprawling gardens. The crisp breeze did little to calm the storm raging inside her. She felt exposed, vulnerable, as if the world had stripped her bare. She heard footsteps behind her and didn't need to turn to know it was Jack. He stopped a few feet away, his presence as commanding as ever, but this time it wasn't a comfort. "Ellie," he said softly, his voice careful, like he was trying not to spook her. "You can't let him win." She let out a shaky breath, her voice breaking as she spoke. "He's already won, Jack. Did you see the way they ate it up? No one's going to believe us now." Jack stepped closer, his frustration evident. "Then we make them believe. We've come too far to let him destroy this." Ellie turned to face him, tears glistening in her eyes. "You think this is just about the company, about appearances. Jack, he went after me. My life, my mistakes. He turned it into ammunition against us." Jack's expression softened, his voice quieter but no less firm. "And that's exactly why we have to fight back. If we let him take control of the narrative, he'll keep twisting the truth until there's nothing left." Ellie shook her head, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can do this. I feel like I'm drowning." Jack closed the gap between them, his hands gently gripping her shoulders. His voice was steady, but there was an edge of raw emotion in it that caught her off guard. "You can do this, Ellie, because you're stronger than you think, and because you're not in this alone." Ellie looked up at him, the sincerity in his eyes piercing through her doubt. For a moment, the weight on her chest eased, and she nodded, though her fear still lingered. Jack's grip tightened slightly, his voice softening. "We'll handle this together, but I need you to trust me." Ellie swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "Okay, I trust you." The hours that followed were a whirlwind of planning and preparation. Jack's legal team worked tirelessly, dissecting every piece of Graham's so-called evidence to uncover its flaws. Margaret coordinated damage control efforts, reaching out to key stakeholders and allies to reinforce their support for Jack. But the heart of their strategy hinged on Ellie. If they were going to counter Graham's attack, they needed her to tell her story, to face the storm head-on. The next morning, Ellie sat in a makeshift studio at Whitmore Tower, the cameras set up to capture her message. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, but she clung to Jack's words from the night before. "You're stronger than you think." As the countdown began, she took a deep breath, her hands steady despite the chaos swirling around her. When the red light on the camera blinked on, she began to speak. "My name is Ellie Harper," she said, her voice clear and unwavering, "and I want to address the accusations made against me." She paused, meeting the camera with a steady gaze. "I won't deny that I've struggled. I've faced challenges, made mistakes, and fought for things I believe in, like the community center in my neighborhood. But those struggles don't define me, and they don't define my relationship with Jack." Her voice softened, the raw emotion in her words impossible to miss. "What Jack and I have isn't perfect, but it's real, and I won't let anyone, especially Graham Langston, take that away from us." As she continued, her confidence grew, each word a testament to her resilience. When she finished, the room was silent, the weight of her message hanging in the air. Jack stepped forward, his gaze holding hers. "You were incredible," he said quietly, his voice filled with admiration. Ellie managed a small smile, the fear that had gripped her for so long finally beginning to loosen its hold. But as they left the studio, a thought lingered in the back of her mind. The battle wasn't over, and Graham wouldn't back down without a fight. The tension in Whitmore Tower was palpable as the sun set over the Miami skyline. Jack's office, usually a place of cool calculation, was a hive of activity. Lawyers pored over documents, PR specialists strategized damage control, and Margaret coordinated updates from every corner of the company. But in the center of it all, Jack stood like a man bracing himself for war. Ellie sat on the couch by the window, her eyes fixed on the city lights below. The adrenaline from her statement earlier had faded, replaced by a gnawing anxiety. Graham wasn't the type to fold under pressure. If anything, her defiance would spur him to escalate. "You did what you had to," Jack said suddenly, breaking the silence. His voice was steady, but the tension in his jaw betrayed his own unease. Ellie turned to him, her brow furrowed. "Did I? Or did I just give him more fuel for his fire?" Jack stepped closer, his eyes meeting hers. "You showed strength, integrity. That's something Graham can't fake, no matter how hard he tries." She wanted to believe him, but the memory of Graham's smirk, the confidence in his eyes, kept gnawing at her. What if it's not enough? Jack sat beside her, his presence a steadying force. "It will be. We'll make sure of it." Before Ellie could respond, Margaret entered the room, her face grim. "We have a problem." Jack stood immediately, his posture tense. "What now?" Margaret handed him a tablet, her tone clipped. "This just leaked. A private email exchange between Graham and one of our board members." Ellie stood, her pulse spiking as she moved to Jack's side. He scrolled through the email, his face darkening with every word. "He's bribing them," Jack said, his voice like steel. "Promising kickbacks if they push for my removal as CEO." Ellie's stomach churned. Can he do that? Won't the board see through him? Margaret crossed her arms, her expression grim. "Graham's persuasive, and with the timing of his accusations against Ellie, he's hoping to paint Jack as a liability. If enough board members buy into his narrative." Jack slammed the tablet down on the desk, the sound echoing through the room. "He's not just trying to damage my reputation, he's trying to take everything." Ellie stepped forward, her voice trembling but determined. "Then we fight back. We find proof of what he's doing and expose him." Jack turned to her, his expression softening. "That's easier said than done. Graham doesn't make mistakes." "Everyone makes mistakes," Ellie countered, "and we've come too far to let him win now." Margaret nodded, her resolve hardening. "I'll get our team on it. If there's even a whisper of something incriminating, we'll find it." Jack nodded, his gaze fixed on the city below. "Do it, and reach out to the board members directly. I want them to hear the truth from me before Graham poisons the well." Margaret left the room, and Ellie turned to Jack, her heart pounding. "What can I do?" Jack hesitated, his hand running through his hair. "You've already done more than I could have asked. But right now, the best thing you can do is stay out of Graham's line of fire." Ellie frowned, frustration bubbling to the surface. "I'm not going to sit on the sidelines while he tries to destroy everything." Jack stepped closer, his voice soft but firm. "Ellie, you've already faced him head-on. Let me take it from here." She wanted to argue, but the weariness in his eyes stopped her. Instead, she nodded reluctantly, her chest tight with unspoken fears. The hours that followed were a blur of phone calls, strategy meetings, and tense silences. Ellie stayed close to Jack, offering support where she could, but the weight of their situation pressed down on her like a storm cloud. As midnight approached, Margaret returned, a file in hand and a triumphant glint in her eye. "We found something," she said, placing the file on Jack's desk. Jack opened it, his expression shifting from curiosity to cold determination. "This is it." Ellie stepped closer, her pulse quickening. "What is it?" "Bank records," Margaret explained. "Graham's been funneling money through a shell company to pay off certain board members. It's dirty, and it's enough to bring him down." Jack's lips curved into a grim smile. He overplayed his hand. Ellie felt a flicker of hope, but it was quickly tempered by a nagging doubt. What if it's not enough? What if he spins this against us? Jack turned to her, his gaze unwavering. "Then we hit him harder. But this is a start." Margaret nodded. "I'll make sure this gets to the right people. By tomorrow, Graham won't know what hit him." The next morning, Jack and Ellie stood side by side as they prepared to address the board. The tension in the air was thick, the stakes higher than ever. Jack's calm exterior was unshakable, but Ellie could feel the weight of his resolve. As they entered the boardroom, all eyes turned to them. The board members sat in a semicircle, their expressions ranging from neutral to skeptical. At the head of the table, Graham leaned back in his chair, his smirk as infuriating as ever. "Jack," Graham said smoothly, his tone dripping with false sincerity. "What a pleasant surprise." Jack ignored him, his gaze sweeping over the room. "Thank you all for being here. I won't waste your time. There's been a lot of noise recently, and I think it's time we cut through it." He gestured to Margaret, who handed out copies of the file. The board members leafed through the documents, their expressions shifting as the gravity of Graham's actions sank in. "This," Jack said, his voice steady, "is evidence of Graham Langston's attempts to undermine this company and manipulate its leadership for his own gain." Graham's smirk faltered, but he quickly recovered, leaning forward with feigned indignation. "This is absurd. Jack, you can't seriously believe—" Jack cut him off, his tone cold. "Save it, Graham. The evidence speaks for itself." Ellie watched as the board members exchanged glances, their skepticism giving way to concern. The tide was turning, and for the first time in days she felt a glimmer of hope. But Graham wasn't finished. He stood, his voice rising. "You think this changes anything? You think this makes Jack Whitmore fit to lead? His engagement is a sham, his image is a facade, and everyone here knows it." The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Ellie stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Our engagement may not have started the way you think," she said, her gaze sweeping over the room. "But what we have now is real. And it's built on something Graham Langston will never understand. Trust." Jack looked at her, something unspoken passing between them. He stepped closer, his voice calm but powerful. "Graham's actions have proven one thing. He's not fit to be part of this company. I am." The room erupted into murmurs, but it was clear the board had made up its mind. Graham's smug expression crumbled, replaced by a flicker of panic. Arthur, who had been silent until now, stood, his voice firm. "I've seen enough. Graham, your time here is over." Graham's face darkened, but he said nothing as security escorted him from the room. Ellie let out a shaky breath, the tension finally breaking. Jack turned to her, his voice soft. "We did it." Ellie managed a small smile, her heart full of relief, and something else she couldn't quite name. Together. For the first time in weeks, she felt like they had truly won. The Whitmore estate was uncharacteristically quiet. The air, usually filled with the hum of staff moving about or Arthur's hearty chuckles, felt still as if the house itself were holding its breath. Ellie stood on the terrace, staring out at the horizon, the golden hues of the setting sun painting the Miami skyline. She hadn't been able to shake the weight on her chest, even after Graham's dramatic expulsion from the board. They had won, at least for now. But the victory felt complicated, tangled in the web of lies that had brought them to this point. Jack's footsteps approached behind her, steady and purposeful. He stopped just a few feet away, the warmth of his presence unmistakable. "You've been quiet," he said gently. Ellie didn't turn, her gaze fixed on the distance. "I'm just processing." Jack stepped closer, leaning against the railing beside her. His tie was gone, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar. For once, he looked more human than the controlled force of nature she'd grown used to. "You should be proud," Jack said, his voice low but steady. "You stood up to Graham. You didn't let him win." Ellie let out a dry laugh, shaking her head. "It doesn't feel like a victory." Jack frowned, tilting his head. "Why not?" "Because none of this was real," Ellie said, finally turning to face him. Her voice trembled, the emotions she'd been suppressing breaking through. "Our engagement, this whole charade, it was just a means to an end." Jack's expression shifted, a flicker of something raw crossing his face. "Ellie. And I went along with it because I thought it was the only way to save the community centre," she continued, her words tumbling out faster now. "But somewhere along the way, I stopped being able to tell what was real and what wasn't. And now I don't know where we stand." The silence that followed was deafening. Jack's jaw tightened, his eyes searching hers as if trying to find the right words. "I didn't know where we stood either," he admitted, his voice soft. "At first, it was just a deal, a way to keep my grandfather's legacy intact. But then you came into my world, and you didn't just fit. You challenged it. Challenged me." Ellie blinked, her heart pounding. "Jack. I told myself I couldn't let you in," Jack continued, his voice growing stronger. "That it was too risky, too complicated. But the truth is, you were already in. You saw past the walls I've spent years building, and you made me see that there's more to life than winning." Tears welled in Ellie's eyes, her breath hitching as she tried to process his words. "So what are you saying?" Jack reached for her hand, his touch gentle but grounding. "I'm saying that this started as a lie, but it's not anymore. What I feel for you, Ellie, it's real." Her heart ached at the sincerity in his voice, but doubt still lingered. "How can I trust that, Jack? After everything we've been through, how do I know this isn't just another part of the act?" Jack's grip on her hand tightened, his eyes blazing with determination. "Because I've never fought this hard for anything in my life. Not for the company, not for my reputation, nothing. But I'll fight for you, Ellie, every day for as long as it takes." Ellie's tears spilled over, her defenses crumbling as the weight of his words settled over her. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let herself hope. "I don't want to be another part of your game," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I need to know this is real." Jack stepped closer, his free hand brushing a tear from her cheek. "It's real," he said, his voice steady, "and I'll spend the rest of my life proving it to you, if you'll let me." Ellie's breath caught, the sincerity in his gaze breaking through her doubt. Slowly she nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Okay." Jack let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, a soft smile curving his lips. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers as the world seemed to fade away. "Thank you," he murmured, "for believing in me." Ellie closed her eyes, the tension in her chest easing as she let herself lean into him. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she could breathe. The days that followed were a whirlwind of recovery and rebuilding. Jack worked tirelessly to restore the company's image, meeting with board members and stakeholders to solidify their trust. Ellie, meanwhile, threw herself into her work at the community centre, using the funds Jack had secured to launch new programs and renovations. But through it all, they found time for each other. Late-night conversations over glasses of wine, quiet walks through the gardens, stolen moments that reminded them of what they were fighting for. One evening, as they sat on the couch in Jack's study, Ellie looked up from her notes on the community centre's expansion plans. "You know," she said, her tone teasing, "we've never actually been on a real date." Jack raised an eyebrow, a smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Is that so?" Ellie nodded, her eyes sparkling. "Our entire relationship has been one long, elaborate performance. I think we're overdue for something normal." Jack leaned back, his smirk turning into a full smile. "Then let's fix that." The following weekend, Jack surprised her with a simple, intimate dinner at a quiet restaurant overlooking the water. There were no cameras, no prying eyes, just the two of them, finally able to be themselves. As the evening wore on, Ellie realized something she hadn't allowed herself to admit before. She was falling for Jack Whitmore. The real Jack. The man who had fought for her, who had opened his heart despite his fears, who had shown her a side of himself no one else had seen. And as they walked along the beach under the stars, hand in hand, she knew one thing for certain. This was no longer a performance. It was the beginning of something real. Months later, the community centre reopened with a grand celebration. Children ran through the newly renovated halls, their laughter echoing like music. Ellie stood near the entrance, watching the scene with a mix of pride and joy. Jack appeared beside her, his arm slipping around her waist. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with admiration. Ellie leaned into him, her smile soft. "We did it." Arthur joined them, his face beaming with pride. "You two make a good team," he said, his tone warm. "I always knew you would." Ellie glanced at Jack, her heart full as she saw the way he looked at her. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen, truly loved. And as Jack pulled her into his arms, kissing her softly under the banner of the community centre they had saved together, Ellie knew one thing for certain. This was the life she had been fighting for, and it was only just beginning.